Mark Cousins Theory Award. Sanford is having technical problems. I think we might have lost him on the Zoom, but he sent me the text to read out. So I'm going to read out something before inviting Giovanna to say something by way of introduction to our award winner Ana Maria Duran Calisto. So this is the text that Sanford has given me. It's for the Mark Cousins Theory Award, and just for those of you who don't know, Mark Cousins has been an incredible kind of promoter and of theory. He was teaching at the AA for many years. He was a kind of legend within the AA, and every Friday I remember going to many of these sessions. The AA would open up and become completely available for free for people to come and listen to watch him, and these mesmerizing lectures that which attracted people from all over London. So he was an incredible icon, not necessarily so technical in his outlook and certainly not so interested in computation, but nonetheless interested in issues and addressing deeply political issues. So I want to just read out the comment that Sanford has made. Of course, Sanford himself is an icon as well within the world of theory. I think that he has led the way and taught in many of the leading institutions, and is, I think, without doubt, the leading theorist in the world today. And it's great that last year we had him on the doctoral consortium session that I hosted. So anyway, let me just read out his comment. It is our pleasure to present the second annual Mark Cousins Theory Prize to Ana Maria Duran Calisto. Maybe I should say what R means. That's the awards committee that's consisted of Sanford himself, Alexander Jaisk, who is right now in Quito, I think, Mariana Rodriguez das Neves, and Victoria Barbo. Okay, so here we go. In the cosmopolitan heterodox spirit of Mark Cousins' writing and teaching, primarily at the Architectural Association in London, this prize seeks both to expand the scope and style of theoretical practice, as well as to encourage emerging voices to venture more boldly into the often intimidating realms of conventional thought leadership. The prize also seeks to identify and affirm fresh objects of concern, particularly ones arguably urgent, but not yet customarily within the narrow purview of traditional design thought and practice. Ana Maria Duran's work can be seen to fit clearly within the tradition beginning from Alexander von Humboldt, whose painstaking documentations and measurements specifically of South American geography revealed more fully than ever before the internal structure and systematics of natural forms, and especially the system of relationships that sustain them. It is specifically the turning of primary attention to the relationships that account for the capacities and performances of our world rather than simply the forms that we believe constitutes one of the urgent virtues of her work. Duran employs the term socio-natural web, effectively marrying social and anthropological determinations with the natural or life system in which they are embedded. We hold this precept to be among the foundational requirements of contemporary ontological thought, the project to realize what might be termed an onto-ecology. Duran's work increasingly targets what in a prior era, most notably in the work of Michel Foucault, and this chimes with Bernard's presentation, was termed systems of thought. Although with the singular expansion from its limited European epistemes to now address vastly broader aspects of human experience and world-making, principally the knowledge systems and practices of those we refer to as indigenous cultures. Duran's work with Amazonian epistemologies is in no ways an exoticism, but rather a corrective model for ecological research and understanding, one in which the structure of mind and the structure of the physical world remain in a continual state of mutual generation and elaboration. The dynamism inherent in this perennial interchange and the inclusive quality of the fundamentally undivided reality that it presupposes have been largely absent from design thought and practice, for which an entirely new avenue of theoretical approach has become necessary. In one particular excursion in her essays on the Quechua onto-ecology, Duran invokes the infinite entanglement of bird cultures and human linguistic ones that create a dense matrix in which ancestral and practical knowledge are embedded, not only in each physical component of the environment, every contact element in the bird's universe, but also in the mesh of meanings endlessly activated by human language and social interactions. Here, the physical world is the knowledge system, and I would stress that. In the pantheist spirit of the French historian Jules Michelet, whose work on the natural history of the bird treated the bird's nest as an integral to its organismal unity, we wish to continue to affirm with this year's award, as with last year's, the importance of directing our theoretical attentions to the powerful shaping forces that still lie outside our routine horizon of concerns. What a powerful speech. Thank you, Sanford, for that. And unfortunately, it was a shame that we weren't able to read it out yourself, but thank you for your contribution. And thank you also to the other members of the jury who painstakingly went through this, and I think unanimously decided that Anne-Maria Joan Calisto should be the award winner. I just want to invite now, again, in the spirit of our diversity, inclusiveness, and our language managers, I'd like to invite Giovanna Pelaca to say a few words of introduction to Anna Maria herself. Giovanna.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Well, Ana Maria Duran Calisto, he's an Ecuadorian architect, environmental planner, and a scholar. She currently teaches at Yale School of Architecture, while also finishing her PhD dissertation on the history of urbanization in Amazonia at UCLA. She is a member of the science panel of the Amazon and has served as academic advisor to the Ecuadorian government. In 2010, she received a Loeb Fellowship in Advanced Environmental Studies from Harvard GSD. Ana Maria has also taught at PUCE, UCLA, Columbia University of Michigan, UC Temuco, and IAC. She co-founded the award-winning design firm Estudio A0 in 2002 with her husband, Jaskran, Singh Kalirai, in Quito, Ecuador, and has co-edited the books Beyond Petropolis, Designing a Practical Utopia in Nueva Loja, and Urbanismo, Ecology in América Latina. Now I will present in Spanish. Ana María Duran Calisto es una arquitecta, planificadora ambiental y académica ecuatoriana. Actualmente enseña en la Escuela de Arquitectura de Yale, mientras también termina su tesis doctoral sobre la historia de la urbanización en la Amazonía en UCLA. Es miembro del panel científico para la Amazonía y se ha desempeñado como asesora académica del gobierno ecuatoriano. En el 2010 recibió una beca Loeb en estudios ambientales avanzados de Harvard GSD. Ana María también ha enseñado en PUCE, UCLA, Columbia, Universidad de Michigan, la Universidad de Temuco y en el IAC. Cofundó la firma de diseño ganadora de premios Estudio A0 en el 2002 con su esposo Jaskran, Singh Kalirai, en Quito, Ecuador, y ha coeditado los libros Beyond Petropolis, Designing a Practical Utopia en Nueva Loja y Urbanismo Ecológico en Latinoamérica. Bienvenida, Ana María. We can hear you, Ana María.
You're on mute, Ana.
¿Me escuchan ahora?
Sí, ya.
Perfecto. No me dejaba el sistema, no sé por qué no me dejaba hacer el unmute. hacer el unmute. Anyway, I'll switch to English, otherwise I'm going to be confusing right now with this mesh of languages. I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you, Neil, and thank you to all the jurors of these wonderful architecture. Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Oh, okay. Okay, I got another sign there. And the text by Sanford is absolutely mind-boggling. I absolutely loved it. So thank you so much for that text, Sanford. And I must say that when I received the message from Neil, I guess this has to do with identity. I had never seen myself as a theorist. I have always considered myself a very pragmatic person facing extremely complex issues in my country. And my ultimate purpose has always been to find very pragmatic solutions to the extremely complex problems. And I know that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because not everything should be understood in terms of problem solving and some sort of an engineering mentality towards the conditions that we're facing right now at a global scale. But I would like to talk about my tiny country for a minute today, because I was thinking this morning, I never get prepared for this type of intimate conversation that we can have on Zoom, and I'd rather just be spontaneous about it. And this morning, what came to my mind, to be honest with you, was Darwin. I was thinking about the Galapagos Islands. I'm going there on the 15th of July, even though my country right now is under some sort of a civil war, under brutal repression of the indigenous movement, which has come out to the city to protest once again. And the reason why I started thinking about the Galapagos and Darwin was because I was wondering what has taken me in the direction that I have followed since I was very young, with a detour caused by the architecture school. And I call it a detour because I studied at UPenn in the 90s, at the end of the 90s, and UPenn was into computing, still is, and I learned a lot about parametrics back then, and we were all learning about algorithms and how to write programs and how to program space and generate space and form through basically mathematics and a mathematical way of thinking about geometry and structure and spatial relationships. But then going back to Ecuador sort of reminded me why I had pursued architecture in the first place. And it was really not about computing, even though I think computing offers a great tool at very many levels to tackle the issues that I was really concerned about, which was on the one hand, the favela explosion in the global south, you know, this planet of slums, as Davis called it. And on the other hand, the ecocide, the epistemicide and the genocide that was being perpetrated systematically in my country, but not just in my country, in the whole of South America and arguably in very many parts of the global south, within these world systems, as discussed by Wallerstein, that very clearly demonstrates the relationships that have been established at a global scale since the colonization that started in 1492 with the Europeans bumping into the Americas has created a very unequal world in which our fate is basically to be the site of extractivism, the mine, the fossil fuel field. Not that there is an extraction in the north. I was recently in Norway, fascinated by that country. My goodness, very interesting culture, very interesting people. Norway lives mainly from extracting oil in the ocean, and it has managed to reinvest most of the profits in some sort of a hybrid of a socialist and a free economy system that I found fascinating. And they have managed to reinvest it in a social, really, enterprise. And the Norwegians live well. And Norwegians, I have to say, are one of the most interesting cultures I've encountered in my life, exemplary. And I've been thinking a lot about, those differences. Why is it that extractivism has led to what we call development in the global north, but it has led to the conditions that we face in the global south, which have to do with zero investment or very little investment and simply immense disenfranchisement of millions, billions of human beings? And the reason why I thought about Darwin was because I was wondering about the relationships between place, territory, and what you could call intelligence, collective intelligence, individual intelligence. And I feel that I am just a child of my territory. If I cross a section across my small country, which was within the colonial world, was part of the Peruvian viceroyalty at some point, and then of the Nueva Granada, or more like the Colombian side of the equation at another, and has always been shifting between this northern Caribbean identity and this southern deeply Andean identity. And we're sort of like right there at the equator, in the middle. And Ecuador is such a colonial name for a country, isn't it? Ecuador, what is that? You know, it's a celebration of this 18th century line for La Condamine and for the French geodesic mission that came to my country to triangulate the territory and figure out whether the world was squashed at the poles or at the sides, and settle the debate between the English and the French, and figure out that, yeah, it was definitely, you know, squashed at the poles, so to speak, and bulgier at the equator. And then Quito actually means, in a way, equator, because it means the area of zero shadow. And the pre-Columbian peoples had already figured out that they were in the equator. And they figured it out in a very intelligent way by using solar clocks. And they knew that if they walked towards the north, the shadows started shifting in a different angle than if they walked towards the south. But in that point, the shadow became zero. And that's interesting to me, to think that in a way it's not as colonial the name, that maybe it's actually quite ancestral from the perspective of the knowledge and the epistemologies of the indigenous peoples and their obsession with the sun and their capacity to figure out zero and to measure throughout the Western Hemisphere from north to south, measure these distances, these angles, and figure out that they were at some line of symmetry. And in that line of symmetry, if you cut a section through the Galapagos Islands, and then the the Pacific Ocean, and then into the coast of the Pacific, and up the Andes and down into Amazonia, in this tiny piece of land, we have that fascinating section that has a very strong embedded intelligence, and so strong that it was in the Galapagos that Darwin figured out natural selection and the mechanism of evolution, looking at the turtles that have very different shells in different islands, depending on how those shells have adapted their form to different vegetation that has also adapted in its own turn to a different context and a different environment, and looking at the cormorants and how they have lost their ability to fly because there's no functional need to do so. And looking at the Darwin finches, as they're knowing now, which also have adapted their beak to different seeds, to different foods that also respond to different ecologies in the different islands. And not far from there in the Amazon, Wallace, another British naturalist, came up to the same exact conclusions in this other ecosystem that has so much embedded intelligence. And that's to mention two. We could mention La Condamine, we could mention Humboldt. Sanford already mentioned Humboldt. And all of this has to do with the same territorial intelligence that has been interwoven for thousands of years by Native Americans. And why did I become interested in the Native American world? For very pragmatic reasons. Romanticism is a European invention, and it's actually quite dehumanizing of indigenous peoples. So I'm definitely not a romantic person. It has hyper-naturalized places like Amazonia, and hyper-naturalized the role of these quote unquote passive human beings who live of nature and are either noble savages or brutal savages, but some sort of a primitive subaltern, if you wish. And it's not like that at all. Now we know, thanks to LiDAR, talk about the role of technology and the type of technology I'm interested in terms of what it can be, what can reveal. We know through biogeography and we know through LiDAR that there are ginormous regional in scale cities in Amazonia, and that they're probably one of the most interesting, fascinating, complex, and defined cities that we have encountered from the perspective of archaeology and city making and the history of cities. 5,500 years of history of the city in the Americas, even though we still call it the New World. And those cities, what attracts me most about them is that they're open and closed, they're rural and urban. Doesn't make sense to speak about rural-urban migration because you can be a citizen and a farmer at the same time. In these cities, you can be a hunter, you can be a gatherer, and you can be an urban spirit. You can simply do it all in these cities that defy dualism, defy Manichaeism, defy binaries and work as some sort of a constellation of agroecological mosaics where the clusters also allow for functions and specialization and exchange, networks of exchange, which is not just about trade, it's also about cultural and philosophical and spiritual and, intermarriage, all sorts of exchange. And those cities have become to me a fascinating obsession because they hold, from my perspective, the seed of a way of reimagining for us the city of the future as we face an ecological emergency. And I'm wondering, how can that brilliant indigenous science, indigenous knowledge, indigenous design thinking that is about building and constructing habitats, urban forests, these incredible hybrids that don't deny each other, that don't create an otherness, but encompass it all. How can those cities inform the future? And of course, I don't want to idealize them. We know that some of those Native American cities, like for example, here in the Mississippi, Cahokia, collapsed due to over harvesting of resources. And that's probably a strongly Malthusian way of looking at the city based on limits, limits to growth, for example, or whether they're environmental or social limits to growth. There's always technology breaking us away from Malthusian limitations. But on the other hand, we know that the way in which we are walking right now is not going to lead us to a better place in the future. We know that we need to shift. We're looking for answers that have to do with politics, with economy, with city making, because city making is about the economy, it's about politics, but it's also about what you mentioned, Neil. It's also about the ontology, the ideologies of nature, the epistemologies. The way we think about things has a huge impact in the way we live in this world, in the way we make, in the way we think. So I guess that's what took me to the indigenous world, a very pragmatic search in which I was continuously disappointed with the history of the urbanization in Amazonia from, let's say, the 17th century with the Jesuits onwards. And it was the pre-Columbian chapter that sort of allowed me to breathe and find hope. And, in this spiraling understanding of time, which is not linear, which is not about like past, primitive, backward, present where we are, and future, more progressive, more advanced, in a non-linear understanding of time and space. It feels like we're going in this spiraling in time into a new cycle that is precisely about recovering some of this past knowledge that we have abandoned, and in a very arrogant way, and that we now need to recuperate, because without it, the future looks pretty gloomy, but with it, the future is full of hope. And it is that hope that my territory has given me, which is South American. And I'm very emotional right now because in that territory that I so much love, the Ecuadorian government is once again repressing in a very brutal and violent way an indigenous movement that started peacefully to, request once again environmental justice, socio-environmental justice. And what has encountered once again is a lot of racism and systemic violence, not from everyone, of course, but from more people than I wish were demonstrating. We're just bringing these once again out into the surface. It's something that I wish we could overcome in the Americas. We have a very violent history and we still have to reckon with it. And we're already in the 21st century. The Tawantinsuyo was conquered in the 30s, in the 16th century. We're heading towards the 500 years of that brutal conquest. And we still have to reckon with the structural, systematic dispossession of a brilliant culture that I'm not going to idealize. We're just humans, we're all humans. But the culture that I think personally holds the key to the future of Latin America and maybe to the Americas and the world. So may my government and the people supporting the government realize that this massacre is completely unacceptable. So thank you, Neil. I wish to dedicate this award to the source of my knowledge, which is Native America. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Such a powerful presentation. You've caught me off my guard with that, but congratulations, very well deserved. And I just want to stress how important it is that on Digital Futures, we're interested not just in the technological world, but all the other impacts and all the other concerns that need to be addressed, especially the environment, sea level rise, the exploitation of the Amazon, and so on. This has been crucial to what we're doing. So this was such a powerful presentation, very, very beautiful. So congratulations, Anna Maria. Thank you so much, and thank you also to Sanford for his kind words. We'll put them up on our website, and thank you to Giovanna for introducing Anna Maria. Gracias. Thank you.